I'm going to be reading three selections this evening from three different pieces of prose. I'm going to start with a short story called In the Shadow of the Condor. Rusty Thomas is an earnest, thoughtful, solitary 30-year-old man working odd jobs while living alone in a small town in the state of Washington in 1965. It's summertime, the harvest is in, and Rusty currently works as a meter reader in a pea canning factory. He's recently met a waitress at a local diner where he gave her a pair of stockings he'd won in a contest. In the selection I'm about to read, it's a week later. Two customers hold places at the counter when he walks into the diner the following Sunday. A family of four occupies a booth against a side wall. Madeline Badger, the waitress to whom he'd bequeathed the nylons on his previous visit, smiles and whispers something to the short-order cook. Joaquin, a tall, sleepy-looking fellow in a soiled apron, turns a flapjack, then glances sideways at Rusty. A mess of ink-black hair straggles out from under his Southeast City Little League baseball cap. Without smiling, he shrugs and makes an indifferent arc with his spatula, then returns to his grill. Madeline tosses her head toward the back of the restaurant, and Rusty follows her through the kitchen, along a corridor, and out a side door. "How you been?" she asks, patting a set of concrete steps just outside the door, inviting him to sit. "Getting worried I wouldn't see you again." "Busy working is all. How's them nylons working out?" Her eyes dance. "Still in their package. Saving them for a special occasion." They are quiet a moment, staring at the graveled roadbed of the alleyway. A flock of sparrows, chattering like women at a quilting bee, flutters nearby. She reaches under her apron and pulls out a pack of Luckies. After taking one, she extends the pack towards him. "Smoke?" "No thanks. Gave it up." She lights up, drags deeply. After exhaling, she stares at the nozzle of her cigarette, rolls it back and forth in her fingers a time or two. "How long did you smoke?" "A decade or so, I guess." He struggles with himself a moment, unsure how his next thought will be heard. "Bad for your health, though. I read the Surgeon General of the U.S. says so. In fact, it may be right there on your cigarette pack." She studies the warning on the label a moment, then draws back and examines him as carefully as she had the cigarettes. "Never noticed that." "Best if you give it up, too. Might live longer." "Life gave me some better perks. I might consider that." "I hear you, but it's all we've got, isn't it?" She looks at her cigarette again, twirls it around in her fingers as if inspecting an apple for soft spots. "You know, you're right." Standing, she flips the butt out onto the roadway. A dumpster is parked behind the restaurant, and she tosses the cigarette pack into it. "There," she smiles, dusting her hands in the universal sign language for good riddance. "And tonight, I'm going to gargle with Listerine for half an hour." He grins. "Maybe excessive. 2 minutes is probably enough." She flounces down beside him once again, tucks her arm inside his. After a moment, she lays her head on his shoulder. "My protector." "If you say so," he says, slipping his arm around her waist. "Actually, I just read a lot." The main factory room was huge, with empty cans barreling around 3 sides at the very top, sandwiched securely enough between 4 wide rubber bands moving at a constant rate. The clatter they made as they streaked along was huge, and for the most part their voyage was smooth, if rusty, if noisy. But every once in a while a can that was malformed or hadn't made it properly onto the runway would send the whole clattering assembly line into cardiac arrest. Rusty had seen seasoned veterans of the pea-canning staffs seize a flexible birch stick about twice the length of a vaulting pole and poke out the offending can so the rest could resume their run. He'd observed the technique carefully. This Saturday, between meter readings, in order to keep his job, he'd begun shouldering that long pole and lugging it around the factory floor, wearing an expression suggesting that, were it not for his vigilance, the whole plant would be forced to shut down any minute. It is 3 weeks into their relationship before Madeline stays over. The next day, as they lie there in the aftermath of having said good morning the only way they know how, she asks, "Don't you want to know anything about me?" Rusty is quiet a moment. "Like what? Anything you want to tell?" "I'm married." He fiddles with the bedclothes a minute. "And I have a son." He closes his eyes. Almost imperceptibly, his breathing deepens. He says in his quietest possible voice, "So where's your boy?" This isn't the question she expected. "With my mother in Yakima. He's 7. Husband?" That's the question. Part of that population the other side of Route 12. Southeast City was a town of 25,000 people whose only newspaper proclaimed it had been a town of 25,000 people for 25 years. An overgrown hamlet whose town fathers seemed pleased by its unchanging nature. The town's 2 claims to prominence within the state were the 2 institutions located there. A small liberal arts college with a national reputation, and the main branch of the state prison system. What's he in for? Petty theft and kiting checks to begin with, but he graduated to holding up filling stations, last time with a gun. I mean, this is his 2nd time caught. He served 18 months a while back, then wound up doing it again. How long now? 5 years this time, served 3 already. He doesn't tell her he's suspected she had a relative in the Hooskow from the beginning, since she lived in a trailer a few blocks from the lockup. Their first time together had been in that trailer, when she'd invited him in wearing his gift of nylons and very little else, while a phonograph played the Drifters in the background, nylon stockings and golden earrings. So, you still love him? She answers quickly as if she'd rehearsed it, or at least thought about it a lot. Did I ever, is what I ask. At one time, I guess I must have. We met young and silly in high school, and he lights out, and I don't see him for another bunch of years, a decade almost. Then comes back into town and starts putting the moves on me. He'd been around by then, done some bad things I never got told about. Oh, he was smooth, all right. And before I developed some sense, I was pregnant. Since he's been in prison, I've filed for divorce several times. 3, in fact. But he won't sign the papers. Does he need to? So my lawyer says. He tosses the covers back, swings his knees over the side of the bed. Sounds like a need to get you a new lawyer. That is, if you really want to get shed of him. Don't be doubting me now, Rusty. I'm doing the best I can. I know. I'll fix us some breakfast. Pancakes okay? Fine. She sits there a moment longer, propped up against the pillow, staring into space. How come you never tell me anything about yourself? He busies himself with kitchen implements, takes down a box of Bisquick from a cupboard shelf, finds milk and an egg in the refrigerator, all before answering. "What's to tell?" he says. "I am what you see, an open book." She snorts and begins to dress. "Closed book, more like it. Closed and with a chain around it. I see what you are now, but I don't know where you've been, what you've done. You had some history before Southeast City, I'm sure. For all I know, you could be a serial killer." His lips tighten. A slight frown crosses his face, but he keeps his back turned so she won't see. He answers, "Shredded wheat or post toasties?" It takes her a minute to hear his pun. Then she laughs. "Smart ass," she says. "Still, just another evasion, Mr. Deep Mystery." One pancake is already bubbling on the griddle before he speaks again. "Give it time, Maddie." And that's all I'll read from